our biggest superpowers usually comes from our biggest wounds. And say that your ability to sense both yourself and others as one of your superpowers?
Yes, I absolutely would. And I love even acknowledging it as that it's easy to perceive it as a weakness because especially in our social construct where we tend to value that confident leadership that is so certain and driven. And yet at the same time, we suffer from the consequences of that confidence when it's a false confidence, right? We see examples on every news feed of the results of somebody following that. I'm certain of this. And then not being willing to see the 10,000 other perspectives that might have adjusted that leadership just a little bit. And it can be a weakness if I allow it to overtake me, for instance. Sometimes I'll feel somebody's sadness and it'll just overwhelm me. And then my wife will just nudge me and say, that might not be yours. She's like in my corner. So that might not be your sadness. And then I'll check in. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Was there a turning point for you to recognize, hey, this is not a weakness, this is actually an asset?
So I will say, I love that question. I will say that it may not be a moment, but it's a period of my life where my spiritual exploration took on an entirely new level. For instance, I've always been aware of my spiritual journey since I was about 10 years old, but the real juice kicked in maybe 15 years ago when I really started exploring not just comparative theology and stuff like that, because I started that path in college, but when I really started exploring, like going deep with shaman and plant medicine exploration and things like that, where really critical look and deep exploration of consciousness, when I saw, oh, you know what? This sensitivity that I've kept in its place for building relationship or developing trust or whatever is actually a huge part of who I'm here to be. And which can only come from that sort of higher perspective that spiritual exploration and can give you. And so I would say, yeah, that moment, if you will, that I decided to step into the spiritual exploration and say, you know what? I'm not going to turn away a single voice. I'm going to explore every piece of wisdom I can. I'm going to work with every shaman who will sit down with me. I'll climb to every mountaintop that I can have time and availability for to find out and to explore more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Echoing what you just said earlier about it's not a singular moment per se. I've always been curious, but when I was younger, my curiosity would be shunned by others because it was too intense for most of them. And also it tests their ego quite a lot because I'll be asking teachers questions after questions and they don't have answers for, obviously. I've reached the extent of their knowledge and they're too prideful to tell me like, hey, I don't know. So they would just say, shut up, right? And same thing with other parental figures in my life. Yeah. And it wasn't until I started to explore my own spiritual journey, as you said, my definition of spirituality is my relationship to the greater whole, not necessarily certain religiosity per se, but my place in the world. So
I agree with that 100%.
Where do I stand? And then from that place, and also look at the different constructs that I have in my mind, and then start to examine one by one. Oh, did I believe this because I believe it? Or is it inherited? Is it I got it somewhere from society or from the Chinese culture or from some books or somewhere? Or every single one of them. And to come to trust more and more my subjective reality of this feels right for me, right? This is my truth versus I'm trying out something, some idea, some belief, some constructs, and I'm going to believe it because I have believed it for the last 3 decades, or I'm going to believe it because it's part of my culture per se. So thank you for sharing that. No, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. I love the way. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just love the way you described that very eloquently as well. That this idea of it's my truth as I've come to understand it, as I've asked into it, And there's always going to be a certain degree of stuff we take on faith until we do our own exploration, especially as young children and young adults. We take on what our parents teach us and what our teachers teach us, et cetera. And I think at some point, the really fortunate among us have the space to ask our own questions.